Welcoming you to a life of awareness, the Presence Project is excited for you to join us for today's podcast with your host, Paul Kerzner.
Hello and welcome to episode 25 of Are You Being Present? My name is Paul Kerzner. I want to welcome you to the present moment. I want to welcome you to the here and now, and I want to thank you wholeheartedly, sincerely, and deeply for joining me in this beautiful and amazing present moment. The title and topic for today's podcast is Maintaining Happiness with Presence. I have a very special treat for us today. I brought Carolyn Berry onto the podcast. She's an energy healer and a published author. The book that she's written is I'm Happy, How Did I Get Here? And it's a really interesting read. I want to begin this podcast by briefly delving into my perspective and my perception on happiness, which I do believe that there's a lot of subjectivity to it. Everyone defines happiness differently, and I think that's the way it should be. But happiness and presence are tied together in a sense. While at the same time, happiness can also pull us out of the present moment. We have to always be cognizant of what is making us happy, because there are times where we will reflect back in the past or the future and derive our happiness from those things. And really, the one place that happiness belongs is in the present moment. And I've delved into the present moment, and I've provided presence tools, and I've talked at length about living in the here and now. And it feels appropriate for me to touch upon this topic and explore it with someone who has written a phenomenal book on this very subject. So Carolyn, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
I was hoping that we can take this time to learn a bit more about you, your background, how you got to where you are, and where you're headed.
Sure. I wrote this book, I'm Happy, How Did I Get Here? Because for the longest time, I was just so unhappy. And from the perception of my family, friends, or people that knew me, they just thought I was happy because I had a great career. Was making great money. But when I went home at the end of the day, I was so unsatisfied. And I had to deal with all the unhappiness that laid within me. It was the frustration, the anger, trying to live up to other people's expectations and perceptions. So it really made me think about, what is it that makes me happy, not everyone else?
And that's a great question. I think a lot of times we ask ourselves the opposite. And so to go inward, to ask yourself, what truly does motivate me, what makes me happy, and more so what's making me unhappy is a very worthwhile endeavor. I can only speak from my own life where, I had a career and that I thought would make me happy. And I was under the assumption that money would make me happy or possessions would make me happy. And those turned out to all be quite fleeting, because those things come and go, and really what I found is that happiness is an internal process, and it's something that is earned more than anything. It's not something that could be given, and in my opinion, it's really not something that could be purchased. It has to be something that is cultivated, and it's cultivated in the present moment. So maybe you can go into a little bit about your book and the processes that you provide to the people that you work with and to your readers in general about how to be happy.
Sure. I think the first thing is I really had to decide for myself that I didn't want to be unhappy anymore. So then I had to figure out, well, what does that mean? How do I love myself? Anytime I actually ever worked with somebody, whether they were in the medical field or friends or family or some sort of mentor, they would always say, Carolyn, you need to love yourself more. And I used to get frustrated because I said, well, what does that mean? I'm getting a massage once a month. How much more do I need to love myself? And I realized that it was the way that I viewed myself, the way that I spoke to myself, either on a cellular level. So I had to change that first. And that took some time because I really had to be honest, and I had to pay attention to what my ego was saying versus what my spirit, again, diving into other people's perceptions and all that worldly stuff. I too thought that money and having a great house and a job and all that was going to make me happy. And I remember when I turned 30 and I sat there and I said, wow, this is just not what it's cracked up to be. I felt so alone and so miserable, and I said I have to change. So I left my corporate job, and that's really what I started to talk about in my book, because the first thing is I lost my identity. I had no way to introduce myself. I was this corporate person with this title, and once that started to strip away, I really had to dive into who I was. I felt like nothing because I didn't have that title with it.
So you were deriving your sense of happiness with a label.
Yes.
Basically. And
Yes.
so that created your identity.
Yes.
And so as you started to take a look in the mirror, you started to realize that that's not who you really were.
Right. And then that comes, once you start looking at your identity, then you have to deal with the judgment. You know, I thought judgment was just making fun of the way somebody did their hair or what they were wearing. But we judge people on what career they choose. We judge people on how they raise their kids. We judge so many different aspects of people all the time. So that was another thing I had to dive into and see. Not only was I judging other people, but I was judging myself.
And really, that's the crux of unhappiness, is ultimately, judging yourself more than anything, because the more judgmental you are on yourself, the more judgmental you're going to be on everyone in your life, everyone that's surrounding you, everyone that you encounter.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. You're basically describing your awakening into the present moment.
Yes.
Okay, and sometimes that's a little bit abrupt because you have to take stock and ownership of what has taken place up until that point.
Yes.
So I'd imagine that that there was some transition. There were a lot of feelings that came up, and ultimately a lot of significant changes that had to take place so that you were able to shed that false sense of being, that false identity, and to shift more into your true nature.
Yes. So when I started to look at the things that needed to heal, like for instance, my anger and frustration, disappointment, I had this perception that once I healed that, I would never feel it again. And that was a big misconception, because we live in the real world. We're emotional people. Things are going to happen. If we have any limited belief system or expectation, there's going to be disappointment. So once I realized that it's still a process, that's how it helped me stay in the present moment, because I didn't want to go through my laundry list of things I had to heal. I finally came up with this mantra, which was, I release the energy that no longer serves me, because it made it easier. Then I didn't have to dive into all that past stuff that was weighing me down, because it's a dark road. And when you're looking at it, that's great, but you don't want to be in that emotion. It was like I was getting more frustrated the more and more I started to see how much I needed to heal. Instead of just being present and then noticing or looking and saying, wow, that was me 10 years ago, or that was me 5 years ago, and then bringing myself back to this present moment. Who am I today?
I think, I'm totally with you on that. But I also understand that there's a way to honor the past without you allowing it to dominate your feeling space. That's where true understanding takes place. Because if you can look at some of the things that have happened in your life with an acceptance, you can transmute those experiences and turn them into very powerful opportunities.
Yes.
Instead of travesties or terrible experiences or whatever they are, and giving them those powerful labels, which they don't need. But again, sometimes it's just easier to not even give those past memories any time at all, and just shift into a state of being where you can see who you are, how you are, and where you are in that present moment.
Yeah, it was really hard for me, because when I started down that path and I started to look at all the things that I did, or I started to feel guilty, or I was blaming myself. There was even some shame that came up. But now I can look at it and realize that that's who I was 5 years ago, or again, 10 years ago. I'm not that same person. So now it's almost like in my mind, I just light a candle to that memory. But I don't have any energy that it's attached to. I can even laugh about a lot of things that I did in my past. And some of the things I did when I was angry, I'm not an angry person today. So it's a complete different version of myself. And you have to be detached from it a little bit to be able to just see it, not run from it, not act like it didn't happen. But you're right, you just want to take notice of it, but it's not creating who you are today.
Yeah.
And then it goes into the future too, because once I started healing my past, then I was fixated on what was I going to do next with my life. What was my life purpose and all of that stuff. And a lot of people, I get that question, what is my life purpose? And my view of that is, what if your life purpose was this thing, this very moment? I thought my life purpose was I was going to massage the world and heal them that way. That was my very first career in the healing arts. And then after 7 years, I realized, wow, I can't do this anymore. My body is physically exhausted. And then it went into energy. And then I started to realize when I started to love myself and listen to my meditations, I realized that, wow, I'm healing people with my voice. And then writing my book, now I'm healing people with my words. So my life purpose has changed over the years. And even in my career too, I know this is going to change, but I've surrendered to it, and it keeps me very present. My purpose was being here today and recording this podcast with you. Right?
Yeah. And that you're talking about a really important presence tool, which is simplifying. So, we just need to simplify the present moment. Asking yourself what your life purpose is while it can be a profound question, that question will pull you out of the present moment in a moment's notice.
Yes.
And the truth is that everything's constantly changing anyway, including you. And so you would be remiss to give yourself a static definition of a purpose that can change at any time.
Right.
And so I would, if someone were to ask me that question, I would say, well, where's the fluidity, in your reality, or to just give yourself a purpose of, just being helpful, being loving, being accepting, being of service to others.
Yes. There was actually, when I had mentioned, and you mentioned the same thing about even dealing in our past, we're not going to hold on to the energy, right? It's about being very present. So we can still want things in our future. It's almost like we're planting that seed, but we're not being fixated on it, if that makes sense. I would love nothing more than to have this grand healing center that's 150 acres with a dog park and all these things. Can I do it right now? Can I afford to purchase it at this moment? No. Is it still in my future? I'm not sure. But that idea, once I feel that, I put the excitement into it, I have the feeling around it, and then I detach from it because it's not here right now at this very moment. So I'm not telling people not to believe or get excited or to plant those seeds. You definitely want to do it. You're putting that intention out there so it will be manifested. You get in that energy so you could pull it towards you, and then you get back to that present moment. It's all about that balance.
There's a key word that you just put out there, and I think it requires us to kind of delve into that, is detachment. The Buddhists say attachment creates suffering, and I believe that to be so. I talk about detachment in a sense where we detach from our thought stream so that we can be observant of it. You're talking about detaching from an outcome with a hope that outcome still takes place, with an intention more than an expectation.
Yes.
And that's an important topic, is detachment, because if you become overly attached to anything, that creates suffering, and that will directly impact your ability to be happy. If you can hold space for something or someone with an intention, and the intention has to do with something that you're passionate about, something that you're happy about, that will just create more of that feeling space. And this is an important exercise for a lot of us who become overly attached to the things in our lives. The truth is that nothing is permanent, nothing stays the same, and the more you are attached to even an idea, the more elusive it becomes. So, my suggestion to the listeners, as well as to myself, really, just as a reminder, is detachment is a wonderful exercise, and it has everything to do with maintaining happiness. Because as you go throughout your day, you're going to start wanting to hold on to certain things that make you feel better. But really, the only things that you need to kind of focus on are the internal processes that are taking place, how quickly you're allowing change, how allowing you are of the present moment, and how willing you are to release and accept.
Yes, a lot of people that I've come across in my work with clients is they have a misconception about detaching or attachments. And especially when it's dealing with loved ones. Now, I'm not a parent, but I've counseled a lot of parents, and I see that they're wrapped up in their kids' energy, which is great because you want to be able to give them advice. You want to be able to teach them, but you have to pull back and have all of your energy. So the misconception around detaching or releasing attachments is that it's gone forever. And it's not. You're just not holding the energy to it. So I talk about that in my book because I think it's really important. Whether you had mentioned it's a material thing or a person or an outcome or an idea, we have to bring all of our energy into this present moment. And a lot of times our body stores different energy from 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. So if you can bring your body into this present moment, and one of the things that I teach is to literally start communicating with your cells, you have to remind your body of how old you are. So the biggest thing is just start present timing the date, today's date. And you remind your body that today's date and how old you are, so that you're bringing all of your energy into this moment, and it's not in the past or it's not in the future. Because when we heal something in our heart and our mind, we also have to bring that energy into our body as well, so it's not confused. And that will allow us to release those attachments, because it's not our body wants to have our own energy. We need to have our own space, and it's really not you're not being mean, you're not detaching from someone else. It's not that you're forgetting about it. One of the things I'll mention with that too is about forgiveness, where forgiveness is about releasing that energy, and you're not taking off the pressure of what happened in the situation. You can remember that, but you're not holding the energy to it. So forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's being present and allowing you to release that energy, because it doesn't serve you anymore. Whatever happened, situation, and again, that's part of detaching. It's just reminding yourself that, oh, that was in the past. It's not happening to me at this moment.
Yes, and just to weave it into the title and topic, these are quintessential behaviors that we have to embody. If you do not release and forgive, happiness will always be this unattainable feeling space for you, because holding on to past experiences only keeps you in the past, and it creates a future that is wrapped up in your past. Forgiveness is a gift, and it is a gift that you give yourself. 99% of the time, the forgiveness that you give to someone else, they've already moved on from it. They're not holding on to it. There's a interesting saying. Forgiveness, holding on to grudges is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. It doesn't do anything for them at all. Okay, so you can harbor resentment your whole life, and it just poisons you. It just ruins your ability to be in the present moment. And if we're talking about happiness, and happiness is something that's really important to you, and being present is something that's being important to you, it just takes a certain level of awareness and cognizance of like what's going on, how you're feeling, and why you feel the way you do.
Yes.
That's part of the awakening.
And partly for me too, I'm still realizing how controlling I still am. That's something I'm working on at this very moment, because I can't control other people. I can't control other situations. The only thing I control is this very moment. Right? And that's, again, helping us stay present is by just being conscious of where you are with your thoughts. And if you think about something in the future and the past, that's fine, and then let it go, and then bring yourself right back into this present moment.
Even control, in my humble opinion, is an illusion. It's not real. We can't control anything. We can't even control our own bodies. And that's the truth, and that's a scary truth. But we hope our bodies are going to behave the way that we want them to, and we can take care of our bodies to the best of our ability. It doesn't mean that that's going to lead to perfect health. There's no such thing as perfect health.
Right, absolutely.
So, relinquishing control is definitely a topic that I've touched upon, and I will continue to touch upon, because it's so relevant to how we move through our realities, especially in the 21st century, especially because we're given the illusion that we can control things, and we really can't.
Right.
And so the quicker we realize that, the more we can relinquish, the happier we can be, because we understand that, again, control is like attachment. It just creates suffering. And, we need to kind of peel these things away so that we can better understand how we're either adding to our level of happiness or detracting from it. Yes. Because, most times, we are the arbiters of our own fate. We're the arbiters of our own happiness. And too often people place blame on other people. Oh, this person isn't making me happy. Oh, this thing's not making me happy, whatever it is. It takes a level of responsibility, personal responsibility, and that can only happen if you are awakened to the fact of who you are, and you're the more so that you're present with it.
Right. And then it comes down to the confidence. So even though I knew that I had these gifts, one of my strongest gifts is knowing, and I just knew things for me, what was going to be best for me. But I would listen to people who are older. I would listen to teachers. You would listen to family. There's all these things. So it starts to detract you from really listening to yourself. And if I were to give anybody a suggestion, is if you start working on some of those things like your ego and identity, if you start honing into really listening to yourself and developing those intuitive gifts for yourself, then that's going to help you draw closer to your happiness, because you can live for yourself in this moment. You don't need to live for your kids and your husband or your wife or your family members. Yes, they're a part of your life, but you can only truly be 100% happy or even comfortable with yourself in your own skin if you can define that for yourself. Now, you mentioned that the definition of happy, everybody, that's different for everyone. So you really have to find it for yourself. What does that mean? You know, do you have joy in the moment? Is it bringing you sadness? Is it bringing you frustration? Like, what kind of emotion do you want to experience in this present moment? If it's not making you feel good, make a change. And that brings up a whole nother part. You have to be able to willing to make that change. Tackle your fear. Because even fear, as you mentioned with control and illusion, so is fear. It's not real. Your emotions that you feel around it, it's absolutely true. But you don't have to stay in that. You just have to be able to realize that and be vulnerable and also courageous enough to make that simple change.
You know, I think that it's important to note, and as you're saying this, it's coming up to me, is that, you know, happiness is a choice.
Yes.
I mean, so is being present, but it really is a choice. You don't have to be a victim of circumstance and correlate your happiness based on the things that are happening to you. You can make a choice to be happy or work towards happiness, and you can achieve it if you're willing to let go and to not control and not be attached.
When I found out, really, when I finally felt like, oh, I made it, I'm happy now, and it wasn't based upon my job. I was actually teaching a class, and I was getting ready for it, and I was just sitting there, and I had joy for no reason. And I actually laughed, and that's when I decided, I was like, wow, I really need to write this book now, because I actually felt it for the first time. I didn't have to do anything to achieve it. And that's why I knew, I was like, wow, I'm being very present for the first time, and I'm just allowing to just be. And I loved being with myself, which is awkward to say. You know, it's not my ego talking. That's just truly, I love that. And I can say that confidently now, where before I didn't like being with myself.
No, if you don't like being with yourself, you're probably not going to be happy.
Right.
You know, and that's just the truth. If you're not comfortable being with yourself, by yourself, then you're going to have some core issues, some real struggles. And if that's the case, then that definitely needs to be addressed first and foremost.
And, you know, happiness could be an illusion too. And I think one of the other topics that I talk about in my book is the negative emotions, because you have to realize that there's that spectrum, right? There's the negative emotions, but there's also so much joy that could pull you out also. There's that balance of really being in that moment. So how do you address those things?
Yeah, well, I mean, something I talk about a lot with my patients is that we live in a relative universe. So, you know, and since that's the truth, at least that's the way I perceive it to be, that you can only know happiness from being sad. You can only know dry from wet. You know, you can only know light from dark.
Yes.
And so if you only knew happiness, you wouldn't know it as happiness.
Right. And how could you relate to other people?
Exactly.
And in fact, when I teach classes and I talk to people, I'm still looking for that one person who's never suffered. You know, do they exist? No, we've all suffered on some capacity. Our definition of suffering may be different, right? What happened to us, our circumstances, all of that's completely different. But the emotion is somewhat common. And I really want to meet that person. If you're out there, if there's a listener out there who has never suffered, please find us and let us know.
Which it very well might be their perception, and if that is the case, I respect it. But is it a reality? No. You know, to live is to suffer at times. I wouldn't say to live is to suffer. I would say that, you know, there's going to be some level of it in some way, shape, or form. And like you said, some people are going to experience it more than others. But we all are going to experience some level of challenge. What we do with that and how quickly we move through it, how it affects us, that's where the subjectivity comes in. Because, you know, we are living subjective lives where, you know, where we see the world a little bit differently. but we're all experiencing the world at the same time, which is what makes it so very interesting.
Right.
It's our egos that want to separate us and make us feel different or better, or usually worse. I find the ego likes to make us feel worse. And so we need to be conscious of that as well.
Now, you mentioned part of being present too is being okay with changing. And now that I'm talking to people about diet, because I think that's somewhat a big factor, because for me anyway, I've realized that certain foods make me feel heavier, and then I don't have any energy, and that brings me down. My emotions then start to change. And what I've realized that when people are at least conscious of how the energy is making them feel, whether it's a negative or positive emotion, it just is. But you can realize that what you feel today isn't the same as 5 years ago. So I just laugh about this because as we're kids, we don't like vegetables, some of us, right? That's kind of a common thing. Well, we're adults now. Have you tried broccoli, or have you just ingrained in your mind that you're never going to eat broccoli because you didn't like it when you were 5 or 10? So allow yourself to try new things and experience them, because even if you didn't like them yesterday or 5 years ago, you might enjoy them today. It might be a different experience. And I mentioned food just to be funny because people can relate to that. But maybe there's a certain type of food, or maybe there's a certain, you don't like roller coasters because this experience happened to you. Well, you've healed in different ways. You're a brand new version of yourself. So why not go out there and try those experiences over again and see if your perception is different?
Yeah, so basically what you're talking about is creating new neural pathways, which is so important, especially as we get older, because the older we get, the less brain elasticity we have, and the harder change is. It doesn't mean it's impossible, but we do need to also understand that our potential for happiness is correlated with our desire to change and to grow and to try new things. Because if you keep on doing the same things over and over again, you're going to keep on getting the same results.
Right, even from a physical standpoint. That's why if you work out with a trainer, they always switch up your routine because your muscle has memory.
And I know some of us are creatures of habit, myself included. So when I say that, there's no criticism. It's totally understandable. But you do have to step outside your box every now and again. And you do have to try new things. You have to go to new places. You have to meet new people. That is a big component of happiness as well. Because you just never know. You don't. You can. And the worst thing you can do is have expectations. And that just shuts all the possibilities down anyway.
Yes, you've probably have run across this when you're working with a client or a patient and they bring up a situation and you get them to talk about it, and it literally sounds like it just happened yesterday, but it's a situation that happened 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So they've decided to never like that thing, whatever it is, because that happened to them, right? So in your opinion, how do you get them to start to make that change? Is it really just about that conscious awareness?
Yeah, that's a great question. It is about awareness. Okay, so the minute that you shine a light on someone's behavior is the minute that they can take a step out and see what they're doing. But it has to be done in the most graceful of ways, otherwise a person will feel criticized.
Yes, and see, that was the biggest thing for me. Even putting out my book was very healing for me because, one, I'm exposing my true self. I'm exposing my gifts, I'm exposing my feelings. There's perfectionism on exactly what am I going to put in the cover. And I realized how serious that is. But I also now, I tend to just laugh when those things happen. I laugh at how ridiculous that I can be and how critical that I can be. It still happens. Me being happy is realizing that those things are still going to come up for me. But I'm not going to sit in that emotion or let it ruin my day, my night, or even weeks, right? I'm allowing myself to feel it. And then I just laugh about it now, where before it just brought up so much pain and miserable. And I thought, oh my gosh, this healing process that I'm taking myself through is such a dark path and it's going to take forever. And I've realized that it may take forever because we're like peeling an onion. There's always going to be layers. But I'm excited, like, okay, Carolyn, what's going to come up for you today?
And, really at the heart of everything you just said is perception. And so you could perceive something as really dark and taking forever, or you can perceive it as not, and then it'll be resolved tomorrow. Reality is perception and perception is reality. And I can talk about that for quite some time. But to just sum it up is like, your beliefs and your words are very powerful.
Absolutely. And how many times has somebody said, oh, will you just get over that? Or, oh, you need to let it go, right? That's not the way to help somebody, because their timing is so much different. Even in relationships, there's a thing that I've heard a lot. If you break up with somebody, or let's say it's a divorce, they'll say, oh, you really shouldn't date somebody for a year. Who put that timeline on there? If you meet somebody and you actually have healed, why not meet somebody the next day and now you're in a new relationship? But this world has created all of these false belief systems. So you have to be able to look at that and say, is that a truth for me? Or is that something that's just made up from the world? Mm-hmm. And it's different for everybody. Somebody who gets a divorce, let's say it's the exact same situation, they may take 6 months to heal. They may take a year to heal. Somebody else may take a day. Mm-hmm. And then we might even perceive that like, wow, they really didn't heal because it only took them a day. Energy changes, it shifts quickly if you stay in that present moment. So who are we to judge it, or to even say or put a timeline on it?
Well, you keep on bringing up judgments, and that's definitely a presence distraction that will pull people out as quickly as anything else, really. And we have to be honest with ourselves when we're walking around and looking at other people, and that we're not being judgmental. I don't know anyone that is happy and also judgmental. It's just those don't go together. They
not
just
in the
don't.
same moment, that's for sure.
I mean, so you might have periods of happiness, but if you're going to be judgmental, those are going to detract from your ability to be happy, to stay in the present moment, and to allow life to flow properly. And so, like, one of the things that I like to bring up is, you have to watch your words. You have to watch what you're saying about other people, the energy behind it, your feeling space when you're saying that. Again, an awareness of and an awakening of your responsibility and how you're interacting with your environment, and ultimately how that's making you feel. But behind all that is the question, how do you want to feel? Because if you want to feel happy and free and better, then you have to really take note of all of the behaviors that you're enacting and what they're really leading towards.
Yeah, and you really have to hone in and define it for yourself. This brings up 2 stories of mine. I remember that I had a cousin, her and I are the same age, 2 different completely scenarios, right? I'm single, I'm career-oriented. I left home when I was 16 and traveled and have done all this stuff. And she's still at home. She's married and has 3 kids. And she actually asked me, well, how can you be happy? You're by yourself. You're single. You have no kids. Well, that doesn't define my happiness. Again, that's a perception. Me traveling the world makes me happy. Me being able to be selfish and take care of just me makes me happy. So again, we have to be cautious and look at how other people might judge ourselves too, and not detract that, because I could have went one of 2 ways. I could have bought into that system of like, wow, actually she's right. Do I feel sorry for myself now because I don't have those things? Or do I actually not want those things? Because there's a pressure, from society that equals, if you have this, then you must have that. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah. What it is projection more than anything. I mean, she's definitely being judgmental and critical, but it's a projection, because at that moment, she can't see you for how you are. She can only see you for how you are based on how she is.
And the other story I wanted to mention, because it's kind of funny, there's a perception if you're happy, then you must not be unhappy, right? But we have moments. You probably could relate to this, where there's a feeling of, let's say, the opposite of sadness, and then you pull yourself back out of that. Well, I was driving, and I happened to have a lead foot. I happen to drive, speeding, but I don't like the consequences. And this friend of mine, I actually, somebody pulled out in front of me, and I think I said something negative, or I might have even said a cuss word. And she said, wow, I can't believe you can speak like that and still teach meditation classes. I thought, wow, I'm still human. I still feel at this very moment, right? There's things that I'm working on. My potty mouth might be one of them. This was a couple of years ago. But it doesn't define me of who I am. It's a moment that comes and goes. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Now, if I'm running around living my life like that, or projecting or saying those things and living in that moment by saying negative things about people or being judgmental, then I can see that. But I realize that, wow, people are always going to have their perceptions. But it takes me back to me being very grounded, very focused, and knowing who I am and what makes me truly happy. And again, it just ties into that being very present. And being very present is also observing how other people are. We might be poked, or we might be initiated to engage in a conversation that may not be healthy. And we can choose to not engage in that conversation. Does it serve us? Is it helpful? Is it going to teach me something? Can we still be engaged in a world, but also not be of it? Right? Can we just sit there and observe? We can if we're being very present.
Yeah, that's the passive observer. And that's something that, people need to work towards, because when you awaken to the present moment, you awaken to the fact that you are being dominated by your thought space. You're the victim of your thoughts. The follow-up step is being an active observer, where you force yourself to observe your thought stream. And the step after that is being a passive observer, where you can just take a step back and let it all flow and not chase any of your thoughts. All are worthy endeavors. So anyone who's starting on the path, it's your time to understand that you're probably being dominated by your ego, and its voice. And sometimes that's also an abrupt reality and realization, but it's a really healthy one at that. This has been a very productive conversation, and I'm glad that you came on the podcast, and we can kind of explore happiness and really how it relates to presence and some of the challenges that exist and the work that it really takes to get to a place where you can consider yourself to be happy. Because ultimately there's a ton of subjectivity to what one person claims is happiness.
Right.
It is not a one size fits all by any means. And either is presence, for that fact. I might teach presence, but I'm just providing a very loose framework for how you can experience presence, because my present moment is going to feel infinitely different than yours. There might be some similarities, but I'm not here to tell you it should look, feel, sound the same way that it feels for me.
Right.
If I'd like to give you an opportunity right now to share with the audience how they might find you, or where they might find your books, how they can get in touch with you.
Absolutely. My book is online. You can find it on Amazon or Balboa Press. And again, the title is I'm Happy, How Did I Get Here? And it just sums up whether you're new to this kind of work or you're a seasoned person. There's great stories. A lot of it is when I was traveling to South Africa, different perspective of healers there, and also understanding energy. So it's a fun read. It's very easy. It's all about my experiences, and it's not a boring teaching book. It's really getting you to identify that these things are probably happening in your life too. You can also reach out to me and find my website at carolynheals.com.
Nice. Carolyn, I want to thank you for joining us on the podcast. I want to thank the audience for listening, and I want to welcome everyone back to the present moment.
Thank you for listening to the Are You Being Present podcast, brought to you by the Presence Projects. Remember, you have a choice. Choose to be present.